Broadcasting from the Podcast A Go-Go studio at Stony Brook University, our show, The Comeback, is sponsored by the School of Communication and Journalism and the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. Our purpose is to start a countdown to our hopeful return to normalcy following this past year's pandemic. My name is Melanie Formosa, and I'm your host. We'd like to lead you into the fall with a weekly update on how we feel, look, and think about tomorrow. With me today to discuss the status of our mental health is Danielle Marola, a licensed clinical psychologist and the Associated Director of Stony Brook's Center for Prevention and Outreach. Welcome, Danielle. Thank you.
Hi, Melanie.
So I want to start off, mental health is huge. It's always been kind of in our minds, right? But now with the pandemic, it's really becoming more prominent, right, in society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm constantly looking for, what are the positives or the pros that are coming out of this time. And I think one of them is that there is clear messaging and information that's coming out that's really making sure everyone recognizes the importance of mental health and well-being. And that's with the knowledge that, this last year and a half has been pretty difficult, and the expectation that the kind of processing and the transitions that are going to be going on, need to be addressed and spoken about. So we make sure we are taking care of our mind and our body. So I think that is a pro, that it's certainly more out there and being discussed, which I'm glad for.
How can changing the outlook that we have on our mental health benefit society?
I think the impact can be enormous because, again, our mind and body are so uniquely connected, so much so that sometimes it's hard to know, is this being driven by physical, biological pieces, or is there a part of my mental health, my brain chemistry that is informing things? But it is such an important part of our overall well-being and success and our ability to maintain and sustain that we are taking care of our mind and our body. And again, for long-term success, it's just a necessary thing. So I think the other real pro here is the sooner we could have these conversations, the better. So the more we start with our children, the better. The more we start incorporating this into our language, into our conversations, and the earlier the better. I really come from an early, and CPO comes from an early intervention model, and I've seen time and time again throughout my career that the more information, knowledge, and communication that's going around about mental health or what it could potentially look like or be like, the improved trajectory for all. So the earlier we speak about it, the earlier we have the language around it, the more we can combat the stigma that has carried through generations, and really make sure we are attending to our whole self.
We definitely have to combat that stigma because it is so prevalent everywhere. And I was reading about smiling depression, which isn't, an official disorder in the DSM-5, but it is very common and typical for almost everybody, I feel like. And can you maybe go into that and how we can make that more known?
Mm-hmm. I think, over time there's been caricatures about what mental health looks like. And so we think, it's someone is just in bed, looking sickly, unable to do anything. And we don't realize that there are so many who are managing with very significant symptoms of depression, but seem very functional on the outset, right? And actually in our QPRs that we do at CPO, the question, persuade, refer, bystander intervention trainings aimed at kind of recognizing the signs of suicidality in order to know how to intervene and get that person to support. There's a video in there speaking to exactly that, right? That, this person was very effective appearing in their outward appearance, but behind closed doors, their relationship both with themselves, with others, was significantly negatively impacted. There was substance use, all sorts of things because it takes an incredible amount of energy to have to put our faces on, right, for the world, our face for our boss, our face for our professor, our face for our parents, right? Like it's incredibly draining. And so one of the things is that ability to have authentic spaces and places where you could just be yourself is like such a necessity. And that time, that those opportunities to be able to say, yes, I am struggling is so important. But, we come from this like high achieving, society that it has to be and look a certain way. And I really do think that does such a disservice to so many human beings, because the fact is it's not pretty. It's not butterflies and rainbows. It takes work, and there's going to be difficult times, and it's okay to struggle. Some of the most successful human beings in this world have pretty significant mental health issues. And I wish it was discussed more, right? Because, then there would be, again, more language, more ability to say, you know what, I need to take these couple days off for my mental health, and know that actually helps you to continue further and farther. So, I hope I answered that question.
No, you did. And I didn't realize that so many prominent people in the world have met. Really? Can you give an example if you know off the top of your head?
Well, I think there are those who come out and speak to it. So you know what I'll do? I'll speak to those that I've had the incredible opportunity to cross paths with. Some of the most creative human beings and intelligent human beings I've ever came across had significant mental health issues. In fact, I think prior to coming to university, I worked primarily with individuals with early psychosis. Prior to that, I was working with individuals with chronic and severe psychosis. So these are illnesses that are often identified as being within the schizophrenia spectrum of illnesses. When people hear that, they think like, oh my gosh, that is like horrible. I can't, but I've seen time and time again, how early intervention changed the trajectory. But I've also worked with human beings who have this diagnosis, who I cannot tell you, the intelligence. The thing is that they're so in tune to their environment, in such a deep way that it could often really be, very uncomfortable and traumatic, but learning how to manage that. And so I could guarantee you that there's doctors, there's lawyers, there's male men and women and people who have illnesses that they are thriving and successful once they have, understood what this meant, what was needed, and just like we would do with any illness, right? What does this mean? What do I need to eat? How do I need to take care of myself? When those things are understood, it's really just about incorporating that into one's lifestyle. So again, you are able to live to your greatest potential.
Can we for a moment talk about secondary gains and the people who have kind of benefited from the pandemic? For instance, maybe people who have social anxiety and now they can stay at home. So kind of that positive, negative relationship.
I love that question because, yes, there are many who have benefited. I have a couple in mind. And in fact, I think myself have benefited in certain ways because I'm not, and I'm definitely an introvert. But this has proven very positive for individuals that, and many of us have this experience, who get overloaded by others. That creates things like anxiety, social anxiety. And so that's a really important question, because for all of us, this transition is going to be really important and different than how this started. We have the opportunity to process and work through this so we can transition back in a strong manner. For these individuals who have benefited from this, it's the same thing. How do we now start putting some scaffolding in so we could start transitioning back? But what have we learned from this, right? I think we would be foolish to think like, oh, everything's in person now, like, oh, we're just going back to normal. I think there's a lot that we have learned. And I could tell you, even like from the CPO perspective, from Center for Prevention Outreach, we're looking at what worked virtually, right? We're listening to our students. And so most things that we're going to be doing, there's going to be some hybrid model. And I think for us individually, we also need to say, what was helpful for me in this? And is there any part of this that I can maintain so I could kind of not expend all the energy I was expending? And then where do then I direct it, right? So I think collectively and individually, we need to think, how is this helpful or not? And what things can I benefit from trying to maintain in this? And what things do I need to prepare to transition to? But absolutely, I think for all of us, we need to start kind of exploring this past year, what was helpful, what wasn't, and what does this mean going back? And I think as a university, in all of our areas, we also need to be thinking about that as staff, faculty, and of course our students are coming back to whatever this new reality is going to be.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people have kind of become adults in this year and a half, where maybe they're at home with a loved one or a parent or a sibling who has a mental illness, and they've had to cope with it and help that loved one. So how do you think, you're talking about, learning, right, from this past year and a half, this pandemic. What can we, what specifics, what can we actually apply to the fall as we come back?
I think that's a really great question, Melanie. So you pinpoint something that is important. We just went through collectively a time filled with uncertainty, unknowns, a lot of ambiguity. And I think that if we all look back and think about where we were at that first month and where we're at now, it is likely that the feeling of anxiousness, chaos, fear subsided in fairly significant ways for some of us, not necessarily all of us. And it's important for us to recognize that change in us individually and as a community over time, because we have developed skills during this time that if we don't kind of pause and think about, we might miss. And I think one of the skills is we had to figure out how to tolerate that ambiguity and that uncertainty. Many of us had to be put in situations that we didn't expect, whether it's with our family system again. And we had to learn how to navigate those relationships and that space in order to get through it. And many of us were able to do that to some degree or not. And for some of us, maybe we couldn't, and it's still pretty combative. I don't want to put the name on it, but that's okay too. Again, what was getting in the way? Like maybe it's informing, all right, once I can step out of here, I need to for my own health and well-being, right? We've tried in different ways. Or, maybe it's like, wow, I didn't think I could live in this family system in this manner. Maybe my role has changed, right? Like maybe there's something I'm doing differently or viewing differently. But I do think we really need to start kind of assessing and taking stock in this whole past year, no matter where it's landed. Because again, I'm not even speaking to, many of us had major losses, whether it be loss of a job, whether it be loss of human life. And we were not able to process and grieve in the manner in which we have been used to. And I think that also needs to be acknowledged, because as things are opening up, we do need to find those ways to process and grieve in order to heal and recover and move into these transitions.
Accepting ambiguity is probably one of the most important things of life, especially for me, because I like to control everything, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we all do. Mm-hmm. And just kind of stepping back and realizing that it's okay for things not to be certain.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're not taught that. Like that's not something that's
taught.
No, we're not. And that's why it's so important to reflect, but absolutely. And, a lot of what we talk about, what you hear about is this like mindfulness piece, but it really is so helpful in this tolerating of ambiguity. And what it's saying, it's not, try to bring yourself to some Zen beautiful place. No, it's be where you're at and just try to be where you're at without judgment. And that is not an easy thing to do, right? Like I know right now certain things are not where I want them to be, but I'm here doing this podcast with Melanie, and it's like this really cool experience because I've never had it before, and I kind of want to like sing into the mic, but like allowing myself to be there, right? And then all of a sudden there's energies that I'm not expending right now because I'm here. And everything that I have to attend to, in an hour from now, I'll attend to then, right? But I'll have the added energy because I'm not it's not pouring out of every part of me right now because I'm in the moment. And that's not, again, something that comes naturally, and not even for me, right? It's something I need to remind myself. Right before this interview, we were talking about breath. I need to remind myself, and I encourage everyone to remind themselves to breathe, right? Like, it sounds silly, but there's so many times that we are not really breathing, or we're breathing really shallow. And these are just kind of things that, if we are paying attention and remind ourselves, can really afford us the added energy we need to kind of get through all these transitions that are upcoming.
Absolutely. And also understanding that there is a support system out there, right? Like, in the fall, there's going to be freshman housing. So having that inclusivity and that warmth of fellow students going through the same stuff that, I'm going through, for instance. Can you speak upon, about that a little more?
Yes, I'm super excited that there will be freshman housing. So for the first time, freshmen will all be in one area, with everything that they need really at their fingertips. The interesting piece too that we're talking a lot about, we kind of have 2 years of freshmen, right? We have those who are freshmen this year and are coming back as sophomores, but we're never on this campus. I think that's going to be interesting. And then we have our freshmen that are coming in. And so it's going to be really lovely because it's going to allow us to have very specific connection and outreach to our freshmen coming here. So right from the beginning, besides all they're going to garner as it relates to the academics and learning about Stony Brook, we're also going to have the opportunity to really, right on the onset, have them heighten their awareness about their health, their well-being, their mental health, and how this is vital to their overall success here. So it's a really exciting move, I believe, that the university is in the midst of making happen. And I think it's going to really allow for further connections, like you're saying, to happen. When you're in the same area with people who are having the similar experience, no matter what you might be majoring in or thinking you're majoring in, it really affords opportunities for connection, and we need that connection now more than ever. So I think it's going to be an awesome move.
You were on the task force for that decision, right?
Yes, but I cannot say, yes, I absolutely was. But I cannot say or take the credit for the incredible direction that it went into. Stacy, and I'm going to lose her last name.
Stacy, wherever you are.
I mean, and our undergraduate colleges, really paired with our campus res. Yes, there was this task force supporting that, and I'm grateful to be a part of that. But my gosh, they have and they continue to do incredible work to really expand the opportunities on this campus, both for growth within the individual, within the community, but then the incredible part is what our community can do for the community surrounding us. So it's very exciting.
I want to ask
Zanettis. Don't hate me, Stacy.
I want to talk about the psychological effects of reopening. So I know neuroplasticity, the mind is, very malleable, right? And with masks, at first, at least I could not stand wearing a mask. And then over time, it was like, okay, this is normal. And I wasn't forgetting my mask in the car anymore, right? It was just natural. So now we kind of have to relearn everything, right? Like looking at a person without a mask on, or not elbow bumping instead of maybe shaking hands, like how is the mind going to react to all of that?
So I think there's a range of where we all fall on this, right? So we have, individuals that maybe did not want to leave their house and still maybe are just starting, right? And then we have those who were on the other range that perhaps even had some resistance towards it, and but eventually, did what they had to do, right? So I think we're on the range, and then we're on the range with the stress and anxiety around that. So this is one of those things that I also encourage us to kind of individually check in about where we are at on that range, because I think similar to what you're saying, at some point, somehow, the mask became comfortable to me. Mm-hmm. It felt like a safety, but it also felt like I'm messaging to the community that I care about the community. You know, like this is something that I felt was important for the community. And now that we have even like the CDC says, oh, if you're vaccinated, you could be outside without a mask, which I am, but I still feel like there's a message if I'm not wearing my mask. So it's a very interesting kind of, I don't know, conflict, but I think that, so to be honest, I'll wear my mask outside still. Even though like a part of me wants to like throw it off, but, you know, so I think we are all in a different place with this. And I think we're also in a different place when we're seeing other people without masks. So I think there's going to be a lot of undue anxiety and fear because, again, there's a lot that's uncertain. But that's why I think it's so important that we're talking about it. And I'm so pleased with this podcast because I think it really starts to open up those opportunities, because we do need to kind of work through these discomforts in order to like manage anxiety. But I also think it's important that we are able, there's a term I came across after hearing Dr. Terrence Roberts speak a month or so ago. And it was care enough to confront, basically. And I think I that really resonated with me, you know. So if you're feeling a certain way and something is important, I think it is important that we address it. And there's ways to address it that are kind, that are thoughtful, and that don't have to be combative. But I think immediately when we bring up something that might feel like there's a conflict, we think it's a bad thing. But I, in fact, think it could be a caring thing. So I think that's how we navigate and negotiate this. And I hope there's more conversations like this to allow us to do that.
Well, thank you for this conversation, Danielle. It was really insightful, not only for our listeners, but for me too. Just being mindful, breath, being in the moment, not worrying about everything that's, you know, the hundreds of emails, right? On your email, just kind of being in the now. It's so important, and not stigmatizing mental health. Absolutely. And taking rest when you want to and when you feel you need to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And offering the grace for yourself and for others to do that. Like that is an important piece so we can maintain and sustain for the long time. Being
kind to yourself. Right.
This was so much fun, Melanie. I hope you have me back. I like this whole setup, like mic in front of my face.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for coming.
No problem. This was really awesome. Thank you so much. You're doing a great job. And I think this is a really important podcast to help us transition back.
Thank you. Please join us next week for another episode of The Comeback. I'm Melanie Formosa. Keep smiling.